Hello, Boreas podcast fans. We have Dr. E. Michael Jones back in the house. Welcome, Dr. Jones, and thanks for coming back.
Thank you. Good to be here.
To introduce Dr. Jones again, he's a prolific writer and commentator. You can find his works on fidelitypress.org. He writes on topics, most recently wrote about walking with a Bible and a gun, the rise, fall, and return of the American identity. Previously, we talked about Dr. Jones' book on the Jewish revolutionary spirit. He also wrote about the sexual revolution, the Holocaust narrative, and many other topics that I believe make him an eminence grise, an intellectual figurehead in the new right movement. For today's topic, we're going to talk about the Medjugorje phenomenon. For those of you who don't know, I would briefly describe it as one of the biggest pilgrimage sites among Catholics with alleged Marian apparitions or apparitions of the Blessed Mother. The biggest contested one, so not approved by the Catholic Church. And Dr. Jones investigated. The apparition started in 1981. The seers were 6 teenagers. The phenomenon grew and spread. I believe Dr. Jones visited first time in 1987, wrote a series of articles throughout the 80s and 90s, which culminated in the book titled The Medjugorje Deception, Queen of Peace, Ethnic Cleansing and Ruined Lives, 1998. So, as somebody born in Yugoslavia and the province, the Republic of Bosnia, which is where Medjugorje was, I grew up, born 1984. So I lived in the Socialist Federal Republic of Yugoslavia until I was 7. And in 1991, 1992, that country collapsed into civil war. So I spent another 7 years living through the war. In northeastern Bosnia, and the sort of ethnic angle, and I think this story kind of ties in certainly with the ethnic conflict. So it has some personal resonance with me, and I thought we could explore the story and the political setting of it later on. So Dr. Jones, maybe we could just start with kind of the basics. I believe you first went to Bosnia to check out if this thing is real. I'm supposing you would be comparing it with something like Fatima apparitions. So when you landed in Herzegovina, what was the story, and what were you looking for? What would be your kind of criteria to convince you that this was legitimate?
Yeah, you're right. I had been to Fatima in 1982, right after the attempt to assassinate Pope John Paul II had taken place. It gave me a basis to discuss this because I felt that it was real. I don't think anybody ever questioned the reality of it. There was articles in a Masonic newspaper at the time testifying to the miracle of the sun, which was objective, seen by 50,000 people. And the messages were short and to the point. It lasted 6 months, and then it was over. And then the seers, 2 of the younger seers suffered horribly with diseases and died at a very young age. The oldest of the girls joined a convent, and she lived there for a long time after that. I think she was still alive when I got there in 82. So that gave me the basis. So in the meantime, I become the editor of a magazine, Catholic magazine. I founded that in 1981, and so by 1984, which is the year you were born, I was getting a lot of people asking me what I thought of it. And so I was in Rome at that point. Spent New Year's Day in Rome, and I met Mark Miravalli there. And he invited me to go to Medjugorje. He was going there right after that. He became one of the biggest promoters of Medjugorje in the United States, and actually wrote a doctoral dissertation on the alleged messages of Our Lady of Medjugorje. I'm not sure of the validity of that doctoral dissertation, but it got him a job at Steubenville, and he became famous there. So over this period of time, we're talking about 1948 to, 84, the drumbeat continues. It's getting more and more press. More and more people were pressuring me to do this until finally in 1988, I had two millionaires paid my way over. And it was pretty clear what they wanted me to say. The story was good seer, bad bishop, pretty much the story. And you're talking about the period where we're reaching the high point of the anti-communist crusade. Tito died in, I believe, 1980.
Yes.
When I arrived there, I went to the bishop's palace in Mostar, and there on the other side of the mountain is Tito Velomite, or some Tito, we love you, in stones written on the mountain. So he had died, and there was a kind of crisis going on at this moment in time, because Tito was Yugoslavia in some sense. It was an artificial creation. He was the head of it. He embodied Yugoslavia. He was the hero of the third world at that point. Sophia Loren would show up on Brach to go to his pleasure palace where they cook pasta together. And now he's dead, and nobody knows which way it's going. And so the people are unsettled. People are showing up there because there's this announcement that suddenly the seers had been seeing something.
Okay.
By the time I got there in 88, it was big business. It was big business. And I went to the meet with Bishop Zonich. And this was I had all of the wrong categories. I had completely inadequate categories when I went there because my categories were political and they should have been ethnic. So I go there and I think to the bishop, well, are those seers, are they liberal or are they conservative? This was completely irrelevant to the situation, and I didn't understand the situation, which was basically that I had walked into a conflict between the local bishop and the Franciscans. And the Franciscans had their own history, and I didn't know about that either. I didn't know anything. I'm a classic American who shows up and doesn't know anything. And I'm trying to figure it out, and he's trying to tell me that, look, I interviewed these kids, and they're lying. I caught them lying. And I'm thinking, this is completely different than what I expected. And I went back home, and then I started to do research. And it was over that hot summer of 1988 that I started to look into the real issue. And this was the first book that I wrote was also the two articles in Fidelity magazine at the time. And it was basically, is the Blessed Mother really appearing? Is she appearing there? How can we judge whether she's appearing or not? And I went to the criteria which had been established by Benedict XIV on sainthood, the criteria for sainthood, but it's also the criteria for apparitions. And it said things like any manipulation or any evidence of lying discredits the whole thing. And so at that point, I started to look into the history. And the man who, in effect, had done a lot of this before me was a Franciscan who lived in Medjugorje by the name of Ivo Sivrich. And Ivo Sivrich could speak to them in their language, and he published a transcript of the first taping of the seers when they were interviewed by Jozo Zovko. There are two priests here who are figuring this thing, Jozo Zovko and Tomislav Vlasic. And he interviewed them, and it was published in French by a man by the name of Louis Bélanger, who was from Montreal. So it was called La Face Cachée de Medjugorje, published in French. So I read it in French, but it was a translation of the interview. This is where the story it begins here. This is what we have to figure out, because Zovko is asking the seers questions, and they're joking. They're not taking it seriously. They're saying all kinds of stupid stuff. And instead of just telling the seers, like calling up their parents and saying, take these kids home and give them a spanking because they're all lying, what did Zovko do? He said, have the apparition inside the church. This is when the Franciscans took over the apparition. And at that point, anybody who went to Medjugorje, no matter what the seers were doing, you got the messages through a Franciscan who had a degree in theology. And so anytime the children would say something really stupid, like the story of the bloody handkerchief, after that, it went through the Franciscans, who would completely sanitize this whole thing. So
Wow.
what you realize is children do not create worldwide phenomena. Okay, I know that there was the Fatima story. They were children. Bernadette of Lourdes, she's a child, but there's always somebody that has to take the thing and integrate it into the rest of the church at that time, and that's what the Franciscans did. The Franciscans took it over, and they had their own baggage that they had to bring with them. So when Vlasic came back, he was away. He came back after the first week, and he thought that this was going to be a vindication of his vocation, because he was having a spiritual crisis at this point. Because what I found out later was that he had lived with this nun in Zagreb. He got her pregnant, and then she had to go to Germany and have the child. So he's kind of in a conflict situation. Do I marry the nun and raise my child, or do I stay true to my vocation as a priesthood? And now when Medjugorje happens, when these kids start doing this, he decides he's been vindicated in his priesthood. Now, both of these people got into serious trouble. Both of the priests got into serious trouble after this period of time. But during the summer, I investigated. I ended up calling up the nun. Her name is Manda. I got her on the phone. She was living in Germany. I speak German, so I tried to talk to her in German. Her German was terrible. She could hardly speak German. But then the son got on, and I actually talked to the son. So I realized this is something that happened here. This figured into this thing. And so at that point, I went back, I'm still thinking this thing through. I get back on the plane, and instead of going directly home, we fly to Rome. And so I'm in Rome now, and I go to meet the ambassador of the United States, ambassador to the Holy See, to the Vatican. His name is Shakespeare. And so I go into him, and I said to him, I suspect that there's bigger forces here than I can see, that we can see on the surface. And I said to him point blank, I said, is the CIA involved in the promotion of Medjugorje? Because this was the moment, again, 1988, we're having 1 year later, the Berlin Wall's coming down. Everyone has this sense that the world is changing, and that Medjugorje was playing a role in this thing, that maybe the Blessed Mother is, doing something or other. So Shakespeare says to me, no, I can't answer that question, but, and then he says, it is something that we would support. So I took that as a yes. Okay, so the CIA is involved in this thing. They are seeing Medjugorje as the southern equivalent of what Solidarity was in Poland. In other words, it's a Catholic grassroots movement. You can get this Catholic piety involved in this thing. And so I ended up going back, wrote to the CIA, Freedom of Information request. I got 20 pages of documents from the CIA about Medjugorje. So they were involved with Medjugorje. And all of it was blacked out. And then they tried to charge me $135. And I said, I'm not paying. So I stiffed the CIA, and I lived to tell the tale. Okay, now that's pretty much the story. So I come up with the story, publish it in September. I went there in May. I publish it in September. And it goes off like a bomb. I mean, nobody was expecting this. Nobody, everything was going to be, bad bishop, pious children, end of communism, and that's that. That's the story. No, it's not that story at all. I sided with the bishop. I said, the bishop is telling the truth. This is a battle with the Franciscans. The Franciscans were involved in the Ustasha early on. I'm saying that there was a connection between the Ustasha. I went to Siroki Bereg later. There were all these pictures of these Ustasha soldiers there. I didn't understand it at that time, but the main thing I talked about was the Vlasic and Zovko taking it over, and Vlasic having this sexual baggage, and everybody exploded. And so I'm trying to get a magazine going. I've reached the point where I got, at this point, I started 81, so by 80, I think I had about 20,000 subscribers. and I lost about 3/4 of my subscribers. They all quit because I said the wrong thing. They sent letters to the editor saying they hoped I died of a heart attack. They're praying to the Blessed Mother that I have a massive heart attack and die because how dare you talk about the Blessed Mother this way? And that's the way it ended. And then 1 year later, the Berlin Wall came down and they all felt vindicated. And that was that. That was the first chapter in the story, my story.
Man, I guess your millionaire sponsors weren't happy with your report either. The ones
No,
who
I
paid
never.
for expenses.
Listen, the one thing you need when you have a magazine is money. And I had 2 millionaires, and I had to decide: do I want the money or do I want to tell the truth? So I decided to tell the truth. And if you tell the truth, you're always going to be punished. And so I was punished. And we lost most of our subscribers, and I became a toxic asset in the Catholic community because I said bad things about the Blessed Mother. That was the rap they had on me at that point.
No, that's terrible. So I didn't realize this, but sounds like the Medjugorje thing specifically was a big turning point in your career. I suppose you kind of, well, you had your differences with Notre Dame before that, but at least you're going to set up a magazine. But this really kind of, I guess, pushed you more, not just outside mainstream United States, but even sounds like mainstream Catholic populace, maybe not, the church hierarchy, but yeah.
Yeah, so that was that. I mean, so here I was back again, wrecked my own career once again. I'm good at this. I've done it numerous times. I'm an expert at wrecking my own career.
Wow, no.
So
That's
was
great.
that.
Yeah. There's a lot to unpack here. I think there's kind of political angle and a spiritual angle. I can just imagine. I was obviously a child when this was happening, but my dad would have been in his 30s, and I remember, of course, people from that era. So, from the Yugoslavian perspective, 1980s were really the time when it all was starting to fall apart.
Right.
When it all was starting to go wrong, probably similar as it did in Soviet Union. But in Bosnia, you mentioned the hill with Tito on it. That was quite typical. As you've noticed, Bosnia and Herzegovina are a hill country. There's hills everywhere, right? So there'd be a hill above pretty much any town. The town I first grew up with also had a Tito on the slope with a red star on it. And then during the war, we moved to another town, which also had a hill and also had a Tito with a red star on it that became dilapidated during the war, where everybody stopped caring.
Yeah.
But during the 80s, again, that was when like the war and everything was cooking up. And I remember as a child, so my parents, my dad and his friends weren't very religious. They were Orthodox Serbs by a sort of cultural label. My dad was kind of like a communist in good standing, as was his dad. Again, not some kind of high functionary. To give you just some family history, I mentioned to you actually my dad and my grandpa was a war orphan because his father and a couple of his brothers or whatever were arrested by the Ustashi during World War II years, and they were shipped off never to return. Actually, everybody assumed that they were might have been taken to the Jasenovac concentration camp in Croatia,
Right.
But nobody knew until in Canada, in somewhere like 2005, I actually found an Israeli website, like one of those Holocaust websites, that had a Jasenovac on it, had a list of victims. It literally had like a Word document or something with some 55,000 names, and I clicked on it, and I actually found all my family members and so on. Just to add some color to the ethnic tension going on there, and Tito died in 1980, as you said. The policy of Yugoslavia was to kind of just bury the hatchet on all the ethnic conflict that went on and just kind of forget about it. There's a joke I was going to say about Yugoslavia, often repeated. They say it was a country with 6 republics, 5 nations, 4 languages, 3 religions, 2 alphabets, and only 1 Yugoslav, Tito.
Yeah.
So, once he died, things are starting to fall apart. For like these kind of Serbian, there's like intractable ethnic conflict there, but I remember people who were kind of loyal. Anyways, because of my family history, my grandpa was, as a 16-year-old, 15-year-old after the war, he was taken by the communists to Belgrade. He went through the army there. He served in some like good units, so he was a man in good standing. They literally educated him, taught him how to read. So because of whose son he was, my dad was also a man in good standing. So he wasn't a big shot in Belgrade or anywhere else, but like in the small town in Bosnia, he would be like he was promoted to some kind of director position in a manufacturing factory and so on. So my dad's perspective would have been kind of typical Serbian Yugoslav at the time. And I remember there was a lot of talk about politics. Nobody ever mentioned Medjugorje in my house. It was kind of quieted over, but at least I don't remember it. But there was this idea that the CIA, the West, was using Catholicism somehow to against Yugoslavia. So I mean,
I think that was true. I think they were. I think that the church, that when Frank Shakespeare told me that he was in the room when Reagan met with Pope John Paul II. And they showed him a big picture of the mass that John Paul II said in '79 in Warsaw. In detail, it was a CIA, spy plane, took a picture of it. And John Paul II was amazed at that. And then the two of them go off into a room by themselves, and that's basically where they plot out the final stage of the anti-communist crusade and the overthrow of communism. And the church was heavily involved with the Reagan administration. And that was great as an American, because as an American Catholic, you think all the stars are in alignment. The Pope and the president, they're like that, and everything's great, except that it ended in a war. Now, where did the war come from? Where did the war come from? The seers used to say the proof of the authenticity of the messages of Our Lady Queen of Peace is that Yugoslavia is in peace now. Well, that didn't last long. That didn't last long at all. And so the next time around, I guess I'm the expert. I think I'm the expert on Medjugorje, the American expert on Medjugorje. If by expert you mean somebody who didn't go along with the propaganda campaign, because that was not a popular position at that point. And so this wealthy man from California contacted me, and he said that they broke up his marriage. They had a program that they would work there. So they would basically talk to you when you got there. And if you had some showed indication that you had a lot of money, they would invite you into the apparition room. And they say, the Blessed Mother would like to talk to you. The Blessed Mother has a message for you. And you go into the room and they go through this mumbo jumbo. And then they ask for money. The Blessed Mother wants you to give me money. This is what they did to him. His wife was sucked into it completely. Medjugorje was basically a feminine operation. It was women for the most part. I would say it was what St. Paul said, silly women obsessed with their sins. Because this is when I flew back, there was one woman on this side and one woman on this side, and they're telling me how bad they were during the 1960s. A lot of it was the sequel to the sexual revolution, and menopause. So they can't, they come and they're starting to feel bad about what they did, and they want some type of validation of their goodness, and so they go to Medjugorje, and then the seers and that whole operation are willing to do that for them, and also willing to take them in. And if they had money, they try to get the money from them. So he's angry now, and he wants me to go back now. So we go back now, and it's 96, and I go back. And this time it's a different story. Mm-hmm. This is the second book I wrote, and now I'm really interested in the ethnic conflict in Yugoslavia. Because I didn't understand. I knew something was happening. I didn't understand. Well, I arrived in Mostar, I think Mostar in 1996. Now, I was in Mostar in 1988, and it was this beautiful, Stari Most. It means the old bridge. Yeah. That's what it means. Yeah. And there was the old bridge, the beautiful bridge, and then the Redva, that beautiful turquoise color. I don't know whether you've seen the water. It's a beautiful color of turquoise. And now I'm back in '96, and the bridge isn't there anymore. Basically the Croats and the Muslims had an alliance against the Serbs, and then suddenly the Croats turned on the Muslims, and they drove them across in the Redva, and somebody blew up the bridge, and they had a battle across in the Redva, and the town was a mess. All the buildings were destroyed. And that was the second time I was there. So at this point, I'm interested in the ethnic conflict, and I read Franjo Tudjman's book on nationalism. And I thought, this is a good book. It's a good book. He claimed that the Serbs were the dominant ethnic group in Yugoslavia. And basically everybody had to conform. The Croats and the Muslims were second-class citizens there, and so on and so forth. I don't know whether, but anyway, what he explained to me was the relationship between religion and ethnicity. And suddenly I understood the United States is Yugoslavia. It's exactly the same as Yugoslavia. You got 3 ethnic groups based on 3 religions, and they're always fighting with each other. So that was a great achievement, a great breakthrough for me, an intellectual breakthrough, to understand the relationship between ethnicity, religion, and politics. And at that point, that was the time that the war was going on, or the war had just ended at that point. And so now I'm involved in writing a completely different book, and that book is called The Medjugorje Deception, which is about the politics, history, the whole history of ethnic conflict in Yugoslavia, and how that led to the Medjugorje apparitions, how the Medjugorje, and I contextualized the Medjugorje apparitions.
Yeah. For sure, I was a person who traveled basically the other way intellectually from you, right? You would be based in America, coming to Yugoslavia. To me, to a lot of Yugoslavs, religion is inextricable from ethnicity, and there's also something bad about it, because to a lot of people, and I'm sure you met people like that, it's merely kind of like a tag, like a tribal totem, pretty much, if you're Serbian Orthodox, if you're Croatian, you're Catholic, and if you're Bosniak, you're Muslim. It's not necessarily a religious conflict in a sense that they are offended by each other's dogmas or something. It's very kind of tribal and territorial, and this thing is, and religion is often abused to achieve tribe, to one up the other tribe. So I guess you've seen that with was it Franciscans? So I'm ignorant about this. I never kind of delved into it. But when you met these rebel Franciscans, did you get a sense that they kind of put their tribal or whatever ethnic vendettas above their faith in Christ or whatever?
Yeah, I said. Well, I have a friend, Tony Katnauer. He's a Croat, and he has a vineyard on Kirk, and we've gone there for a couple years now for a conference. It's a beautiful place. But he said that they wanted to be like Serbs. It's paradoxical, but they wanted to have their own national church. And that was the problem, because the bishop is representative of the universal church. He's got his allegiance to Rome. They don't want to talk about that. They want a church just like the Serbs have a national church. The Orthodox have a national church. They wanted a national church. And that's why they put that ahead of any type of obedience to the bishop. So the bishop comes in. By now, 96, there's a new bishop there, Bishop Peric. And I met with him in Mostar too, and he is of exactly the same position. So at the time, everybody's thinking, so back to Zanic, okay? I'm talking to Zanic. Zanic told me he had just come back from Rome. I said, who'd you talk to? He said, well, I talked to Cardinal Ratzinger. And I said, so what did you explain the situation to Cardinal Ratzinger? And he said, so I said, what did Ratzinger say? And Ratzinger said, I agree with you. And then he said, he met with the Pope. And so I said, well, what did the Pope say? And he said, the Pope said nothing. And that's, I think, where the problem started in Rome. Because the Pope was determined to have, I think, an independent Croatia. He was a Pole. He grew up under communism. He hated communism. Everybody hated communism at this point. So, but he was willing, I think, to get involved in a way that required political compromise. And the political compromise was he would never say that it was true, the Medjugorje apparitions. He would never go there. He did not set foot in that place when everyone else was going there. He went to the official shrine in Razno, official shrine to the Blessed Mother in the Diocese of Mostar. But on the other hand, he never condemned it. And so everyone's waiting, like, well, so I actually talked to Ratzinger, called him up on the phone.
Wow.
Spoke
in German, I suppose?
Yeah, I did. I speak. He said to me, where did you learn to speak German so well? So we then had a conversation about that. And it turns out he knew the school where I was teaching. He knew that school. He knew the nun. He asked me, do you know Schwester Susanna? I said, she was in the room, in a hospital room with my wife. So we had this intimate moment there. We both knew the same nun who died of cancer eventually. So I said to him, yeah, okay, when is the church going to make a pronouncement? Well, I said, when is Rome going to make a pronouncement? And he answered in German, bald, soon. Well, that was it was 1991, something like that. It never happened. It never happened. And that became the fuel that kept Medjugorje going. They could have come out early on, and I'm saying Pope John Paul II did not want to do that because he did not want to upset the anti-communist crusade. That's my judgment on why he remained silent, and that would prove fatal, I think, to any clear understanding of Medjugorje. He set the pattern. It was fatal. We're not going to endorse it, but we're not going to condemn it. And so to get to a year ago, okay, Tuco Fernandez, who is now the head of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, issues a statement on Medjugorje. Now, this is under Pope Francis. Pope Francis said the Blessed Mother is not a mailman. She doesn't deliver messages every day. So that's a kind of skepticism. Tuco Fernandez comes out and says, we're not going to talk about the moral lives of the seers. Well, wait a minute. What about the eighth commandment? Isn't lying? Don't we have to understand whether they're lying or not? And suddenly he says, all we're going to talk about is the fruits. Well, all you're going to talk about then is what you want to talk about, because there are plenty of bad fruits. And we caught these people after what Zanish told me. So the Maria Pavlovich issued a statement saying the Blessed Mother said that Father Vlasic is the new St. Francis, and I'm the new St. Clare. She said this. It's written down. She wrote this down.
Wait, so you are the St. Clare?
No, she
How
is.
Did you? Oh,
Maria Pavlovich. Like, he's St.
That's
Francis.
So crass.
It gets worse. It gets
worse. It's a little too
okay?
on the nose, you know? It's but anyways, go ahead.
So we had the first book had already come out, so I sent a reporter to Parma, for Maria Pavlovich was in Parma with Vlasic and some palazzo in Italy, and they got their own little community there, and the Blessed Mother endorsed this community. Oh, who can argue with that? So the lady I send, the reporter I send, speaks Italian, and she shows proof that Vlasic fathered an illegitimate child. So how can the Blessed Mother endorse a priest who broke his vow of chastity and has this illegitimate child living in Munich? Next day, one day after that, Maria Pavlovich issues another statement, and she says, that statement I issued yesterday was not true. I only did it because Vlasic pressured me into doing it. That's the end of the story. That is the end of the story. The whole thing is phony That is exactly what Benedict XIV said. If you have evidence of lying and manipulation, it's not true. We had evidence both of lying and manipulation at that point. And what happens? Nothing. Nothing. So, on the other hand, both of the local bishops at this point had been courageous in condemning it. And both of them suffered ostracism. And so the rebellious Franciscans, there's another parish in Choplina, which is not far from Medjugorje. I ended up going there when I went there in 96. The whole front door is covered with cinder blocks. And the sign over the thing says, we are not going to give this parish back to the bishop, or something along that line. So Bishop Perich goes there. He gets out of the car to talk to these people. They beat him up. They physically assaulted the bishop. This is the type of people you're dealing with. This is the reality on the situation. Why isn't Rome backing up Bishop Perich or Bishop Zonich? Ratzinger told me they were going to make an announcement. Why aren't they doing anything? Why are they silent?
I don't.
So I think,
really befuddling.
First of all, at that time, I think it's clear that the Pope John Paul II wanted a successful end to the anti-communist crusade. He didn't want to cast doubt on Medjugorje because it was a big part of the anti-communist crusade. That was that. So communism is done now. We're talking about the mid-90s now. It's over. Everybody's ecstatic. We won. America won. Yeah, we're the greatest. And now a different aspect comes in because now we're talking about money. The money is pouring into Medjugorje. The last time I was there, Bishop Perich told me the Franciscans created a bank. They have their own bank because so much money is going in there. A lot of that money went to the Croatian nationalists who were buying weapons so that they could fight the Serbs. And now you've got the collaboration of Rome in money laundering. Let me restate that. The collaboration of Italians in money laundering. So in this period of time, after the second book came out, I got a call from a member of the Bosnian parliament who said that Medjugorje is a center for money laundering. Money laundering.
Okay,
so he said...
how does it work? Yeah, if you can give us details, because there's so much things you can do with money laundering.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Sure. So he said basically Italians have these tax exempt charities in Medjugorje. Oase della Pace. Okay, is one of them. And so what happens, an Italian businessman will make a, let's say, $50,000 contribution to that. He gets to write that off as a tax deduction. So he gets the money back. It's a tax deduction. They take the money and they buy a gas station. They build a gas station, and then they have a tangible asset now that the money created. They are making money, the money's coming in, and then they send the guy back his $50,000. That's money laundering. It circles back to the person who does it. And I'm saying Rome is now involved. Vatican is involved in this money laundering. This is a time when there's a lot of financial scandals at the Vatican. One of them is Cardinal Becciu. Cardinal Becciu was involved in a scandal that involved England, where he bought an overpriced piece of property, apparently kicked money back. And anyway, so I'm writing to Perich, I'm writing Bishop Perich, is this part of the money laundering operation? And Perich said to me, well, he's innocent until proven guilty. But then he was convicted, and he went to jail in the Vatican for this, and then nothing happens. And so what is the net result is Tuco Fernandez is basically saying, we can't tell you whether it's true or not, but you should go. You can go if you want, and be sure to spend a lot of money because we're involved in this money. Now, that's not what he said, but he did say, we're not going to say it's true, but you can go there. Well, what's the point of that? Why are you not going to say it's true? Why would you go there if it's not true? And that's where it ended. It's a very I don't know what's the final chapter, but it's a very unsatisfactory ending because the mind is only at rest when it finds the truth. And he basically said, I don't care whether it's true or not. The fruits are what I'm interested in, and there's lots of money going on there, and that's where it stands. It's a completely disappointing, scandalous end to this whole story.
And like you said, the fruits themselves are, selectively picked for every person that finds Christ. Maybe there's like two of them who got a divorce, or who knows what happened.
You're exactly right. And one of the people who understood this was a Croatian priest, American, Father Pavic, who spent years there hearing confessions. And they'd always, he was the one who told me that Medjugorje was infested with demons. Because demons love it when St. John of the Cross said, the devil rejoices when people seek private revelations. And he told me all kinds of stories about that. And by the end, he didn't believe it was genuine. He felt that way at the beginning. But I had also another testimony of a Unitarian from Boston who was there. Told me, he said, look, I'm a Unitarian. I said, well, can you explain what's going on? I said, well, do you know what an angel is? He said, yeah, I know what an angel is. Well, let me explain to you. He said, let me tell you what happened. Okay. He's in his room, bed and breakfast, waiting to get out to dinner. The door is open, and this naked woman walks into his room, walks across the room, and then walks through the wall. And then he says to me, what was that? And I said, well, it probably wasn't the Blessed Mother, because she generally wears clothes when she appears to people. I said, do you know what an angel is? He said, yes, that was some angels are bad angels. What you saw is a bad angel. And I said, the place is infested with bad angels. So that's the record. They're part of the bad fruit. The bad fruit is what the other guy from California told me. Divorce is one of the common phenomena that accompanies Medjugorje. And nobody wants to talk about that. So what Pavic said to the people who said fruit, he said, just because you were born doesn't mean your parents were married.
Right. So on this theme, when you first mentioned it, it sounds a little bit new agey, and I think you lived through that, right? So we had the Pentecostal movement, which kind of has these random emotionally based revelations. One thing I discussed in my podcast was the psychedelic phenomenon, especially spiritual psychedelic phenomenon. Of course, I critique it, but I talk about how these people, Americans, these first world rich people, go to Amazon nowadays and they take ayahuasca ceremonies, and they meet entities, they encounter entities there, the mushroom people, and the entities are often about, kind of feel good energy. Everything's going to be okay. And they come back. Some of them have like relatively good fruits, like they quit drinking or something, right? But then when you look at the whole pattern, you see some really dark stuff. And one of the criteria I kind of came up with, nothing doctrinal, of course, but there's this idea that when you read the Bible, right, and when you read about whole saintly people encountering godly presence, first of all, there's always kind of fear and terror in a sense, when there's an angelic presence, Abraham falls to the ground, or there's dread. Even when you mention Fatima, there's this kind of sense that the kids, well, unfortunately, they got sick, but there's this kind of fear of God kind of aspect to it. And there's certainly called to repentance and contrition. Whereas from the testimonies you mentioned, and I see everywhere with the Medjugorje, there's this kind of very suspect feel-good kind of vibe that ends up having a super dark side. So would you link that with the New Age thing? And I don't know, so you mentioned already sexual revolution.
Not washing here.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you now. You just cut out. Your microphone's working now.
Okay, I'll edit it. That was a Chinese VPN messing with me. But did you catch my question?
First of all, Medjugorje did become a stop for the New Age movement. The New Agers did go there, and it grew out of the charismatic movement. And the charismatic movement, both Vlasic and Zovko were part of the charismatic movement as it swept through Europe, swept through the Franciscans at that point. So both of these were what it basically came down to. There was a divide in America at this time between people who were charismatic, who were kind of crypto-Protestant, and the Fatima crowd, which was conservative Catholic. Well, Medjugorje brought Fatima and the charismatics together. That was a kind of binary weapon, or it was a genius in terms of marketing strategy to bring two completely different groups of people together and giving them both what they wanted.
You mentioned trafficking in spirits as one of the reasons one of the priests was Father Tomslav was defrocked. What would that mean?
Not only defrocked, excommunicated.
Okay.
He's completely kicked out of the church. Completely kicked out of the church. So trafficking in spirits means summoning demons. That's what he was doing. Man. He was summoning demons. He must have known the place was infested with demons, and he started to summon them so that he could have power over people. Neither one of them stopped. Both of them were defrocked because of sexually molesting pilgrims. Both, I don't think they ever stopped doing that. But Vlasic took it one step further and started getting involved in trafficking in spirits, and that was it. Once that happened, he was kicked out of the church. Now, why didn't Tuco look into this? Why didn't the two main proponents, the two sources of this apparition, the two priests who made it happen, without which it would not have happened? If it weren't for those two priests, those kids would be picking cotton or tobacco in Medjugorje today. Okay? He linked them up. Why didn't Tuco look into the background of these two priests and ask how can this be a good thing if the two priests were defrocked and one of them was excommunicated for trafficking in spirits?
Yeah, it's a little too much. So how does this end? I think at some point you say that Medjugorje is a bit of a litmus test for the Catholic Church. Is it?
I said it was a litmus test for the papacy of Pope Francis. And I'm saying that he failed. This was an abysmal, I can't tell you how disappointed I was. It was a failure of the doctrinal arm of the Catholic Church to issue a scandalous statement that was nothing but pandering to money interest. That's all it was. All it was. Just denying the known truth. Just not even look. You say, I'm not even going to look into what the seers were doing. I just a priori at the beginning declaring that that's irrelevant to any. No, that's wrong. You're completely wrong when you do that. And to say you're talking about fruits, you've already made up your mind. You're only going to look at good fruits. None of the trafficking in spirits, none of the sexual molestation that the priests were involved in, none of that. All of the divorces that took place of people who went there, all of the spiritual misery that came out of that. This was a scandalous misuse of a high office in the Catholic Church. It was scandalous.
Yeah. No, it's you also mentioned I've heard you mention the Pankerica part, which I just want to circle back to kind of drugs. I think you might have skipped that, but you mentioned charismatic movement. I mentioned psychedelic movement. I wonder if these psychedelic drugs, other than the Pankerica episode, was that something like these pilgrims would be smoking? Was there like this kind of hippie aspect to it?
Yeah,
over the ages.
First of all, I asked Ivo Sieveric, what does Pankerica mean? He had never heard of this word. So I have to think, oh, wait a minute, I'll put it together. Itza is the feminine ending, so you cut that off, it's punk. So it's like their word for like punk rocker. That was her reputation in, was it Zagreb? Yeah, where she went to school. Was it Zagreb or Sarajevo? I think it was Zagreb.
Sarajevo?
Okay. Well, anyway, to the big city. She went to the university in the big city, and she had the reputation of being a punk rocker. And so they suspect that what happened is that they were caught smoking dope. They admitted marijuana. They admitted that they were smoking cigarettes or something like that, but they got caught in something they should not have been doing, and then they started lying. And that's similar to another, like the Salem witch trials had the same thing. The kids are caught doing voodoo with a slave from Jamaica, and they start lying so that they don't get punished for doing voodoo. I think that there's evidence that Mirjana, she was the oldest of them, had that reputation of the kind of hippie who would have been involved with smoking dope, smoking marijuana.
Okay. All right, Dr. Jones, we got maybe a few more minutes. I wanted to switch up a little bit and come to the kind of the present time, because we mentioned kind of geopolitics, ethnicity, and religion, and the CIA. And there's two ways we can go here. In your book, I think Revolutionary Spirit, you mentioned you regret the disappearance of the ethnic neighborhoods in cities like Chicago. And I wanted to hear your thoughts how ethnicity and religion played out in the United States, and how's that? It seems quite different, but maybe also, like you said, parallel to the Balkans, because there's a lot of similarities in U.S. As a first-generation immigrant, I would come hear about America or Canada, and especially United States, it would just sound very familiar to me. Like the history of New York City. It's like I'm hearing about Bosnia. There's these Irish and Jews, well, different ethnicities, right? But it's a very much like ethnic thing. But nobody talks about it anymore, and it's supposed to not exist.
That's right. That's why I'm here. That's why God sent me here. Because what happened in 1954, I'm writing an autobiography, and it's called Born Under a Bad Sign. And the bad sign was called social engineering, and the government decided that they couldn't tolerate ethnic enclaves anymore after World War II. And so what they did was they switched the narrative from ethnicity to race. And they started bringing, the civil rights movement starts happening. They're bringing, the Ford Foundation is flooding neighborhoods like my parents' Irish neighborhood in Philadelphia, flooding with blacks. Type of ethnic conflict that is now, the ethnic conflict now is Muslims and Muslims being flooded into European countries. That time it was blacks, to break up the ethnic neighborhoods, because the Catholic ethnic neighborhoods were politically too powerful. And that became apparent when John F. Kennedy got elected. That was Catholic ethnic Chicago that put Kennedy in the White House. And that was had to be changed, and they basically declared war on ethnic groups. So as soon as the blacks show up, like in Chicago, Marquette Park, the blacks show up, and the people there don't want them coming into their neighborhood. They start throwing rocks. As soon as the blacks show up, those people on the other side of the street are white, right? Because they're not black. Yeah. If you ask those people what they were, they would tell you they're Lithuanians. It was a Lithuanian neighborhood where they didn't want Latvians moving, I don't know, or Germans or whatever. It was just for Lithuanians. That was the accepted behavior of cities. Happened toward the end of the 19th century, will give you kind of hegemony over the neighborhood through political party, and you have to promise you're not going to be a revolutionary. That was all destroyed after World War II, and race replaced ethnicity as the sign of American identity.
It also plays into this materialist or scientist dogma where suddenly, ethnic identity is about culture and identity and history and religion, whereas race kind of just sounds like we're animals and we're fighting for our whatever gene pool. So I think there was a bit of a demoralizing there. Would you agree? This kind of shift towards the Darwinian thing?
So what do I mean? What are the two arms of social engineering? The one we've already talked about is driving people who are Lithuanians when they're in Chicago, driving them into the suburbs where they become white, which means you lost your identity. Okay? The other is sexual liberation. Sexual liberation is the other part. I was born 4 months before I was born. The first Kinsey report came out. That's why I was born under a bad sign. So between these two things, they destroyed Catholic identity in the United States. They destroyed everybody. But the main enemy were the Catholics, because they had powerful ethnic neighborhoods all in every big city, and they were coming into their own, and they were starting to exercise that political power.
Okay. So is there in the future, is this gonna, can this be repaired, or what would the future be like if this doesn't happen? How do we solve this problem now? Um, I mean,
God is
the
going to
ethnic
solve.
makeup
God is
is,
going to solve the problem.
yeah.
God will solve the problem. We are at the end of the Third Republic. And now, have you been watching the Jews lately? They are going totally They're freaking out. They are losing their political power. They're losing their control of the narrative, and they are getting hysterical. And they're ready to kill you or send you to jail if, in this hysterical panic, moral panic, where everybody's talking about anti-Semitism. This is a sign that we're at the end of the Third Republic. And we're moving into a new republic, and we can't go back, but there will be a new addition to the ethnic identity. I think it's going to be Muslims. The Protestants are going out of existence. The Muslims are increasing in power. So that's going to be the segue into the Fourth Republic.
Starting to look more like Bosnia then with the Muslims.
It's destiny. No one knew how.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're one of the few people who understands the connection here.
Yeah. Final thought. Since we are on the Jews or neocons, and there is a big kind of ethnic conflict in Ukraine. So how does that play into putting the kind of the local politics there aside, but just from your American perspective, how is this conflict affecting the American psyche and American sense of self? Because you got a lot of people supporting Russian side, a lot of people Ukraine. How does that figure out into this narrative of shifting identity in the United States?
Yeah. So who got us involved in the war in the Ukraine? The same
neocons.
people who got us involved in the war in Iraq. Okay, so Victoria Nuland, whose real name is Noodleman, and she's married to Robert Kagan, hands out cookies, use the NGOs there to overthrow the Yanukovych government in the Ukraine because they signed an energy deal with Russia, and now you've got this ancestral Jewish hatred of Russia driving Americans' foreign policy into a catastrophic war, which the United States is not going to win. The United States is going to be defeated in this war.
Yeah, that's really unfortunate and shocking to me, really, that it happened, but it is what it is. Okay, Dr. Jones, thank you so much for coming on again and for your wonderful recounting. It was a pleasure to have you, and Merry Christmas, Happy New Year.
Thank you. Thank you. Same to you.
All right.